So I've spent the majority of my career trying to become an academic. I studied like crazy when I was in university. I got 5 degrees throughout my life, and I participated in very small research projects, and I've participated in some very, very large scale research projects. I've published a lot of papers. I can't even think what the count is right now, but I've published quite a bit. But I've never really thought of myself as what you call a serious academic. When I was in undergrad, I really admired my professors. They were people I looked up to. They were kind of role models and in some ways superheroes of mine. And I looked at my higher education career as an opportunity to gain a lot of new knowledge, a lot of new insights. So when I was first starting my first undergrad degree, an opportunity came up to be a research assistant for a forestry research project. And this was kind of exciting for me because I was just getting into the whole higher education sphere of life. And then I had this chance to work with a professor directly and to do research, which just to me seemed really, really cool. So I jumped right on it. I was just like, came to the professor's office, knocked on the door and said, please, I want to do this job. And it's also something I think I could do really, really well. It wasn't just that, ooh, this is an interesting career field. It was also reading the job description. It kind of had my name written all over it. So I approached him, and of course, I was lucky enough that he offered me the position. And I got to program simulations of timber growth and harvesting in the region where I was studying. So it was a really, really cool thing. And I sometimes forget that was my first job as a researcher. And I had a blast doing it. I got to dig into some very interesting ways of programming some software. I got to try to understand what in the world we were trying to do with these simulations. And forestry was not something I was actively studying. I was studying business at the time. And I even ended up with my name on a paper, which really made me feel good. It kind of validated that whole experience. But even then, I never really considered myself an academic per se, especially because I was just in my undergrad. I was just kind of this kid working on some research. It was something I found really interesting and fun and engaging. It just mentally really stimulated me. So it gave me that kind of feeling of excitement, that enthusiasm for approaching my work. I eventually finished that degree, and I moved on to another degree. I was studying music, and I was taking a music history class. Now, generally speaking, I'm not someone that really enjoys history. Like, even in high school, like, my history classes weren't something that I got really excited about. And even now, kind of history is interesting, it's fun, but it's not necessarily something that I approach with a lot of, excitement and energy. It's just something that I'm glad it's there. I'm glad there are people that do find excitement studying history. It's just not necessarily something that I super enjoyed. But the teacher in my music history class was amazing. She just blew my mind with her, not necessarily her knowledge or even her the topic that she was teaching, but her approach to teaching was so engaging for me. She didn't necessarily have the most charismatic presentations or anything like that, but it was just something about the way she approached knowledge and the exchange of knowledge with her students. It just really, really thrilled me. A lot of the other students didn't necessarily care for her very much because she was kind of demanding as well. She expected a lot out of her students. But for me, as a student, for a professor to expect a lot out of me, oh my gosh, that really just blew my mind. And it was a chance for me to kind of show one of my professors what I was made of. So I really love the class. I really love that she gave us the kind of freedom to explore different areas with our assignments. So she had this one big assignment at the end of the class that you had to do, and it was kind of an independent study piece of work. So I got it in my head that I wanted to research from a historical sense of a historical perspective, when music first turned into a profession. So when was it that people first started performing music for money? And I was naive as an undergrad to think that, yeah, I can actually figure out the answer to that question. And she was generous enough to approve it as a topic. So I really started digging into it. And every day I got to campus, I would run straight to the library. I would order books from interlibrary loan, and every day there was a new stack of books that had showed up for me. And it was like every day was like my birthday, so I could get to the campus and I could see all these new volumes, all these new texts that just had all these kind of undiscovered secrets or secrets that I hadn't discovered yet. And it gave me this chance to really explore different ways that knowledge has been put together by researchers, academics, and scientists. So it was just a really, really thrilling chance for me to be my own self-directed researcher. My research eventually led me to different locations in the Middle East where, of course, a lot of our civilization first emerged. And it was in this research that I discovered an archaeologist from the University of Pennsylvania who had done archaeological research in what's modern-day Iraq. And he found in that archaeological expedition a couple of flutes made out of bones of a goat. And they were just part of his findings. It was it's at the museum now along with all of his other findings. So it was really exciting for me to kind of make this rediscovery, I guess you could say. And for someone like me who had grown up with Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones playing this hero archaeologist who goes around preserving ancient artifacts, it was super cool to kind of feel that connection or that kind of, in my imagination, that kind of role. So this was a chance for me to kind of live out my fantasy, except on a topic that I really cared about, music, and in this case, ancient music. So I ended up ordering these two huge volumes, and I'm talking massive texts that were the archaeological records from the dig that this scientist had done in the Middle East back in, I think it was the 1920s. So they weren't like a book you would imagine in the traditional sense where you kind of read chapters and things like that. This were just the records that he had documented around everything that they found at the site. And each kind of record came with a very short description. So it would just be like clay pot or pot shard. And this is what it looked like, or maybe this is a short description of it. So I was able to go and find the records around the different bone flutes that they had found there. And of course it just said, bone flute possibly made out of goat bone. And so it was to see that kind of, it's almost primary data right there in front of you. It was in a tangible form. It was really, really exciting for me. And of course I cross-referenced that record with the other records and books that he had written to see, is there any other information that had been documented around these artifacts. And there weren't any. So I eventually came to the conclusion that this is something that I want to examine myself. This is something that I want to dive even deeper in. The problem I had was that it was the end of the semester. And even though I probably could have turned in a report and gotten a reasonably good grade, I wasn't ready yet. I didn't want to just submit something just to submit something. I wanted to pursue this research project to the last possible degree. I wanted to pursue it in its in its entirety. And so I begged my teacher. I said, please, 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 please let me submit this next semester. I've got a good report written already, but I want to finish this. I want to feel this sense of completion and fulfillment around what I'm doing. And it might sound like an obvious choice for a teacher, but I can't tell you the number of times that I've experienced that either my students have come to me and in similar situations and their teachers haven't approved it, or that I myself as a student had asked for this sort of flexibility that my teachers hadn't given me. But I was So I wasn't necessarily I was skeptical, we'll just say, whether or not she would actually grant me that extension. But I was lucky enough that she had really the interests of her students at heart and the interest of learning at heart. And she gave me that approval so that I could finish that piece of work. So immediately I contact the University of Pennsylvania, I contact the museum, and I say, hey, you have these artifacts at your museum, can I come and view them? And they said, well, the museum doesn't have these artifacts on display because they just weren't noteworthy enough, but they do have them in their archive. So I was like, awesome. I said, how is it possible for me to examine them? And they said, yeah, sure, you just have to fill out an application, and then if it's approved, you can come and do that. So I filled out that application, it was approved, and boom, I was off to Philadelphia. I stayed and slept on my aunt's couch because she lived there. And I spent the next few days in Philadelphia examining these artifacts. And so it was so surreal for me to be from the point of like creating that research question that I had, refining that research question, doing my literature review, identifying a source of data, and then being given access to that data I think I was 20 years old. I was an undergrad student. I didn't know anything. So I was going through the scientific process without actually kind of acknowledging that. And the museum curator was super intrigued because she had just never seen someone like me before with such an interest in these random artifacts. So she was kind enough to request a copy of my report afterwards, and I sent it to her. And as far as I know, it's still on file there at the museum. And this was the first time I really fell in love with research. It was the first chance I had to really engage with a research process and engage with it independently. First time I'd ever been given the space to explore a research topic. And it was it meant everything to me. It really, really just changed my life. And since then, I've progressed a lot. I still consider myself an academic, but as I said, not really a serious academic. And that's because I do a lot of work now in innovation and entrepreneurship. And compared to more traditional academics who are focused only on kind of research or focused only on kind of academic papers, I just break that mold a little bit. So when I say that I'm not a serious researcher, it's not because I don't take research seriously. And it's not because I'm not rigorous and thorough in my research. When I say I'm not a serious researcher, what I mean is that I don't see science as the end game. Science isn't the fulfillment of my task. Research science is only a tool that I use to create impact. So I use science to create impact, and I think that's the most valuable use of science. So if you have aspirations to become a scientist, I would encourage you. It's a great field to be in. That's awesome. But really take this consideration. Becoming a scientist can be fulfilling, but maybe just don't become a serious researcher.